Story 1. We met at a science fiction convention. We got to the hot tub and I spent all night trying to sit in his lap, but he was too much of a nerd to understand. We finally hugged in the elevator, and it felt like coming home. It has been 25 years. Story 2. It was just her knee brushing against mine under the table. My mind raced with thoughts. This is it. This is the plot of every adult scene I've ever imagined. I am now legally feral. Meanwhile, I pretended to act normal, sipping my drink like it wasn't just foreplay for my soul. No one talks about how powerful accidental touches are. That wasn't contact, that was a full nervous system hack. Story 3. She was in her car when I leaned into the open driver's side window and accidentally smashed my forehead into the upper door frame. I remember her laughing so much that the kiss didn't really register for either of us at the time. Story 4. The first time he and I really touched was outside the Denver Convention Center during the intermission of a speech by either Jane Goodall or the Dalai Lama. We went to both events at the same venue, but I can't remember which speaker it was, as it was a long time ago. We were standing on a stairway away from everyone else, mainly to get away from the smokers, when he leaned into my shoulder and pressed hard. I turned and kissed him. I knew at that moment that he was the one for me. We were together for 42 years until he died suddenly and unexpectedly 4 years ago. Story 5. I went in for the kiss, and it was pure panic and excitement. When she leaned into it and it happened, it was like magic. 20 years and 2 kids later, I think it was the right thing to do. Story 6. We were friends and accidentally watched a horror film because both of us had time to spare, and the movie had a title that sounded like a regular action film. I'm not good with horror, so when the first jump scare happened, I shrieked and grabbed his arm to hide behind him. I didn't feel much, but he told me he probably should have realized that he started seeing me as more than a friend then. Story 7. I'm probably one of the few who dislike anything first. I don't enjoy the adrenaline rush of the first touch and kiss. The nerves, anxiety, and panic are overwhelming. It feels great only because it's over, and we can now move on to the 100th time we touch and kiss, which is pure bliss because love, trust, and vulnerability are all present now too. It's still passionate but without the nerves. Story 8. Electric, ecstatic. It was so incredibly cute how she looked at me, making eye contact and smiling. I knew she was interested, and then our hands found each other as we spent the rest of the night at the club giggling, smiling, and kissing. It's warmth and coziness throughout your whole body. Story 9. When my girlfriend and I were just friends, things were challenging for me at home, so I stayed over at her place for one night. I was happy to sleep on the couch, but we ended up sharing her bed. We didn't cuddle that night, but our skin slightly touched at some point. I remember an energetic pull. Felt magnetic, as if there was an electric field between us. Eclipse. Story 10. My love language is physical touch. One of the best ways you can communicate with me is through touch. A platonic hug, a peck on the cheek, or even a playful grab. The first time my wife and I went on a date, I kissed her on the cheek at the end. Nothing crazy, no real spark, but I liked her and enjoyed the time we spent together. On the second date, though, while walking and talking after a movie, she grabbed my hand. She initiated holding my hand and kept it until we got to my truck. I felt like a 12-year-old experiencing that first connection. It was exhilarating. There was an immediate spark then. We have been together for 14 years. Story 11. The first time, I was trembling because I felt nervous, excited, happy, and in awe. I remember trying to hide my shaky hands from her. Story 12. Electricity and pure shock. I could not believe that he was kissing me, let alone in front of my friends. This June, we will celebrate our 20th anniversary. Story 13. The most comfortable I have ever felt in anyone's arms. It may sound corny, but it is true. I cannot stand anyone touching me except him. Story 14. Jitters through the spine, tingling of the heart. I couldn't even look into each other's eyes properly. We were 13 and 14 then, and we are 22 and 23 now. It's a long-distance relationship, so every time we meet again, it still feels as electrifying as it did back then. Story 15. We were going down an escalator. It was quite narrow, and our elbows brushed as we both wore half sleeves. We have been together for about 20 years and have 2 children. Story 16. At the end of our first date, he took my hand and kissed it, and I thought I was going to melt into a literal puddle right then and there. My face flushed, and I could suddenly hear my heartbeat in my ears very loudly, and my brain exploded into a symphony of fireworks. It was awesome. Story 17. I want to describe electricity, but I've been electrocuted, and it's not exactly the same. If you've ever been to a concert with deep, heavy bass and felt it vibrating in your chest cavity and throughout your whole being, it was similar, but at a higher frequency. I felt like my spirit was a tuning fork. The air in my lungs caught every time we brushed against each other. I felt like my skin was the only thing holding me in my body. Once, months before that, I leaned in close to show him something on my phone, and I became feverish so quickly that I thought I would expire. My brain felt like a light bulb receiving too much voltage, about to shatter and fry. Story 18. She maintained the "we're just friends" charade but never said those words. At one point, I made her laugh, and she awkwardly pulled the "you made me laugh so hard that my hand just happened to grab yours" move, and it was great. Story 19. We met at an anime convention, and he asked, "Can we take a selfie?" He hovered an arm politely above and around my shoulders. My back brushed against his chest for just a moment, and it felt as if all my sensations had focused to a pinpoint at the spot where we were touching. I think you could have shot me and I wouldn't have felt it. 2 days later, we both fell asleep on a couch with only our legs touching. I felt completely at home and safe, even though we were nearly strangers. One day after that, he said, "Hey, look at me. I just want to see what color your eyes are." And then he kissed me. 10 years later, I remember it perfectly. Story 20. My girlfriend is shy but somewhat mischievous. The first time we met, she asked, "Are your hands cold?" I had no idea what she was referring to and simply replied, "No, it's okay. A bit dry though." Then she grabbed and held my hand for a couple of seconds. It was a bit awkward, and I was confused about why she did that. The next day, she insisted that we meet again. We had a long-distance relationship, and I thought it was purely platonic. While we were waiting for the bus, she placed her head on my shoulder. Again, it felt a bit awkward, but this time I let her do it and gently brushed my fingers over her hands. We then held hands for the entire day. Now we've been in a relationship for 1 year. Story 21. Like I found the one home, the other part of myself that had been missing. When I became aware of feelings, I knew it was love because there was a very powerful, sobering, serious side to it that told me, "This is different from anyone else, take notice." On reflection, lust hits completely differently. Lust is more of a sudden, uncontrollable rush, like a drug, but with no foundation, so you don't feel safe when the high wears off. That sensation is fleeting because there are no strong foundations to grow from. Life happens, and sure, things can get in the way at times, but ultimately, real love not only lasts over time, but it also gets better. It is something that grows. As you both go through life, you will add more and more layers to your connection, making it everything to you. They become your best friend, and the original feeling never changes over time. Story 22. It was our freshers' party in the first year of college. Everyone was dancing, singing, and enjoying the celebration. I arrived late for some reason and found my crush waiting for me. She was my first real crush, and we were good friends with mutual feelings for each other. She was sitting on a chair, dressed perfectly. I approached her and apologized for being late. She said it was fine and offered me a drink. After some time, she asked me to dance. I replied, "No, I'm good," though I wasn't sure why I said that. She grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the stage to dance. At that moment, I realized we had never touched each other before. I felt so nervous, and everyone around was looking at us. I glanced at her, and she smiled as if we were already a couple. I had never felt that good with anyone while dancing. Story 23. It's as if we both had an electric current. I feel my heart racing because of the nervousness I experience. Story 24. It was a deep, comfortable, safe warmth, like sinking into a hot bath after a cold day. He wasn't the one for me, but we were good together for as long as we lasted. Story 25. On our first date, we went to another bar because it was going so well. As we were sitting there talking, we both reached across the table and lightly held hands. I remember thinking, yes, I want him. It was sweet and intimate, and I felt really safe and comfortable, even though I had just met him. Felt right. Story 26. When I met her on our first date, I held her hand across the table and felt an electric charge and a familiarity that overwhelmed me. She shared some health information, and I admired her courage and absolute honesty. She became my woman. I resisted for months and tried to protect my fragile ego, but I eventually succumbed to her charms. Now she's gone, but the memories remain precious. Story 27. My former boss, who I have a significant crush on, was sitting next to me at a work function. Our legs touched under the table, which sparked a night of flirty glances and smiles. He texted me after returning to his room and asked, "My room or yours?" When I arrived at his room, I felt nervous, but the alcohol gave me the confidence I needed to move forward. I sat on the bed making small talk because I was so anxious. He approached me and kissed me mid-sentence, and it was perfect. We continued kissing for a long time, and he kept telling me that he really enjoys kissing me. The foreplay was incredible, but I had my period, so we didn't sleep together. I've seen him several times since, and the chemistry is electric, but nothing else has happened, and it's been over 2 years. Story 28. Shivers. I was nervous but also excited and unsure of what was about to happen. I knew I was up for anything, and after a 4.5-hour phone conversation, it was worth the risk. I had already been on many bad dates and had been ghosted more times than I could count, but I was taking a chance again because I wanted to be in a relationship, and it has been totally worth it. Every single minute of the last 6 months. Even if it all falls apart at some point in the future, it will have been worth it. Story 29. I'm going to comment here even though it hasn't happened yet. As a child, I used to feel so excited about this, and I was for a long time. The concept of not just being near someone who understood you, but actually touching was thrilling. Now, however, while studying at a higher education institution, my friends are continually entering and ending relationships, many of which become very intimate, while I find myself feeling more scared than anything else. I started reading the comments out of curiosity, holding on to the childish impression that kissing on the lips is unrealistic and cinematic, and I have had my fears confirmed by the recurring use of words like electric, vulnerable, and explosive. I never dated in high school, not due to unpopularity, but out of fear. My school was very small, and I was quite insecure. Now that I'm here, I often back out of conversations on dating apps and retreat whenever someone I care about shows interest in me in person. I read a comment acknowledging this fear of contact and the negative impression of touch, which leads to anxiety and stress. I hope people will recognize this. Story 30. I had seen her before but didn't think much about her. Our first encounter occurred as we walked past each other, our hands grazing briefly. I pretended not to notice, took a few more steps, then looked back. She did as well, and we made eye contact. I saw slightly sad but soulful eyes paired with a wide smile. I thought we were both sharing a nice moment, and at the time, I didn't know anything about her other than her name. My heart started racing but was quickly interrupted by her saying, "Watch where you are going." She said it with a laugh, though she usually had a straight face. I faked a laugh because my heart felt like it was in my throat, and I had butterflies in my stomach. Since then, we got together and went on many dates over about a year, but I made the mistake of never asking her to be my girlfriend. This became more difficult when I began traveling for work, being thousands of miles away in multiple time zones. I didn't ask her because it felt like we were moving too fast yet too slow at the same time. At that point in my career, I finally had my first break and was in a position where I could not turn down any opportunities. I truly felt she was the right person but at the wrong time. Almost 2 years later, neither of us is in a relationship, but I'm happy to be able to put food on the table and support my parents and family, and it seems like she's happy on social media. Story 31. It felt strange, but in a good way. That first hug when I met him for our first date at the zoo felt right. Now, 3 months later, we haven't fought, we keep communicating, and we understand each other's needs and boundaries. I believe we are in for a long journey together, as we are respectful of each other while still having a lot of fun. Story 32. He lightly touched my arm to get my attention. I cannot forget his touch. I pray to her more someday. Story 33. I feel like all my body parts were so shocked when he first held my hand. It wasn't even a romantic moment. He wanted to say goodbye and shake my hand, but he didn't let go. My whole body was shaking afterward, and I knew that the warmth in his hand was meant to be mine. It's been 4 months. I hope to see him for 4 years. Story 34. We were in the park, and the date was going well. He had a fantastic sense of humor and was very attractive. He had also been a true gentleman the whole time. We moved closer and shared a gentle kiss. Felt like every cell in my body was on high alert, like a spark. I remember giggling a bit. I felt like a nervous teenager despite being in my mid-20s. Afterwards, we walked through the park and held hands. I remember that his hands felt unique, unlike anything I had felt before. I was very aware of his hands and surprised at how easy such closeness felt for a first date. Nearly 2 years later, neither the kisses nor the sparks have stopped. Story 35. It was more thrilling and somehow shy than the first time. We were sitting on a narrow couch, legs crossed, knees an inch apart, watching a corny show when he leaned his head toward mine. I did the same. Our knees touched. The moment we faced each other, an alarm on my phone went off because I had to pick up a friend from the train station. I couldn't think about anything else for a week until we ended up alone again. Story 36. After being close friends for over a year, one night we had too much wine and cuddled on the couch. After that, we were basically together all day, every day. We both expressed that it felt like our bones ached for each other when we weren't together. We hadn't yet addressed our feelings for one another. Story 37. We met at a party at a mutual friend's home. They played a movie, and there was limited seating on the couch with about 20 people in a standard-sized family room. I sat next to him, and our legs touched as we were squished together. That was 34 years ago. When he talks about it, he says I put my leg on top of his as a joke. Story 38. She hugged me goodbye and held me tightly for a second or two longer than usual. I have never forgotten it. That was 14 years ago, and this year marks 11 years of marriage. Story 39. The first time our hands accidentally brushed while reaching for popcorn at the movies, I swear my heart skipped 5 beats. Story 40. We were friends. I often stroked his hair and hugged him. He didn't really notice for a couple of years. When he finally asked me out, I didn't realize it was a date. We are very comfortable together. Story 41. I think we hugged when we first met. It was the most comfortable hug. It felt like I was home, as if I had been hugging her my whole life. Story 42. I invited him over to my dorm and asked him, "Are you coming up or what?" I had a loft bed. We sat next to each other, feeling stiff like two people who had a crush on each other. By the end of the night, we were fully cuddling. Story 43. After a day hanging out, we went to say goodbye, and I raised my fist for a bump. He looked at my fist, then at me, before slapping it away and pulling me in for a hug. It felt like I was just struck by lightning, and I was so excited on the train home. Story 44. My girlfriend and I were friends for about a year before we started dating. I remember walking down the street to get boba when she linked her arm with mine, and there was just pure, raw energy between us. We were both so giddy that we ended up walking really fast, essentially clinging to each other without even holding hands. The first time we actually kissed, we announced out loud that we were going to, but we had to sit there for 40 minutes hyping each other up because we were both so flustered, shaky, and excited. We poke fun at each other about it now. Story 45. The first tender hug made me feel calm and happy for the first time, and I nearly teared up at how sweet and kind it was. Growing up in a household where positive reinforcement and open displays of emotions were non-existent. A truly tender hug from someone who means it can really melt you. Story 46. She rested her chest slightly on my arm while taking my order at the bar. Felt nice. I have been married for almost 5 years and we have 2 children now. Story 47. We started out as colleagues and were quickly drawn into the same group. We all scheduled our coffee breaks so we could go out together. One time, while taking the stairs, he ran ahead to open the door for me. As I passed by, he gently placed his hand on my back. I immediately felt giddy even though I didn't know I had a crush on him. I had recently broken up with a serious partner and thought he simply had a nice smile. Turns out we are soulmates. He still has a nice smile and was generous enough to pass it on to our son as well. Story 48. It was literally the middle of summer when we went to the cinema, and the air conditioning was broken. I still wanted him to put his arm around me, but we were both sweaty and uncomfortable. Yet somehow, I had chills all over my body. I am currently married, and he is taking a nap with our 1-month-old son. Life can be good. Story 49. He was picturing how I looked, so I showed him and let him touch me. He felt so excited that he thought we were going to be intimate for the first time, but we didn't. He ended up feeling both excited and upset with me. Story 50. It was simply electrifying. I never knew that this tiny spark was actually real. Well, she is the most wonderful lady who came into my life, and the day we had our first contact was truly magical. Story 51. The first time I touched her was a hug at work, and it literally felt like an electric pulse. Not a shocking electric jolt, but an absolutely soft touch. She smelled so good, like blackberries or lilac. Story 52. Our first non-platonic physical touch was oral sex. We didn't even kiss or engage in sexual intercourse for the first few months. This was the craziest start to a long-term relationship for me. Story 53. Seeing all these wholesome moments in the thread makes me regret doing it the first time with a woman I met in a bar. Story 54. In a movie theater, we were watching a horror film. The real terror was me trying to shift my arm closer to her. When my arm finally went around her, I literally forgot how to breathe, but it was the best feeling ever. I will never forget it. Story 55. We met at a bar listening to live hard rock music. After eyeing each other for a while, we finally danced. I was mesmerized and felt a little tingly when we touched. He memorized my phone number, and our first official date was soon after. We will celebrate 35 years of marriage this summer. Story 56. When he brushed against my leg while I was unintentionally and uninvitedly staying over, I had never felt a rush like that before. Story 57. My body felt electrified. It was a different feeling I had never experienced before and still cannot describe. Story 58. Reading all these people sharing their moments is quite depressing. I thought I had that experience too. Turns out I was manipulated and discarded like a piece of trash. Story 59. We were helping a friend move out of his apartment. She hurriedly moved boxes to catch up with me, and I rushed to keep pace with her, so we never synchronized our efforts. When we finished, she sat next to me, and I mentioned it was a shame we didn't get to spend more time together that day. She grabbed the packing tape, held my hand, and taped us together, saying, "Well, at least we have the rest of the night." Story 60. We clicked instantly and hung out for 3 weekends straight. We haven't spoken in 2 months, but I still think about the last hug we had. It was at 4 a.m. when he dropped me off. We went in for a casual goodnight hug, but I held on longer, and his grip tightened around me. It felt like the world stopped. It was quiet, and our arms stayed around each other for a good minute. I wish it had been longer because that was the last time I saw him. I can still remember his quick heartbeat. Story 61. I was seeing a religious girl for 6 months, but our relationship was purely platonic due to her beliefs. On her last day in the city, she rested her head on my shoulder for hours. She had never visited my apartment before, but she stayed with me on her final day. God bless her wherever she is. Story 62. He held my hand to look at my nails. I felt my face blush and felt lightheaded. I had never experienced that instant reaction before. Story 63. That tiny touch felt like an electric shock, but in the best way possible. My brain just went, "Oh wow, this is happening," while I tried to act normal. It was definitely one of those moments you don't forget. Story 64. My eyes rolled and I felt weak and paralyzed. It was her head resting on my shoulders. There were other girls who had done that before, but I didn't mind. It was different with her because I liked her. The same feeling was present when we held hands for the first time. I was so blissful. Story 65. He hugged me from behind at the airport because I couldn't find the car our mutual friend was driving to pick me up. It was the most genuine, heartfelt hug, and I felt like I could have stood there letting him hug me for eternity. Story 66. We had a mutual attraction toward each other for a while, and when we finally admitted it, he touched my finger with his, and my whole body became warm. I think my face turned really red, too. Story 67. Ugh, the first touch was probably awkward. Did I even shower that day? It has been downhill since. Story 68. I had my first girlfriend when I was still in high school. We had a group project and went to our classmate's house. Unfortunately, they got bored and left to ride a small Japanese bike outside. No one was home, just the two of us. We shared the longest hug I've ever received, and it continued for weeks, but unfortunately, it all had to end. As we were doing our daily routine of hugs and kisses on the cheeks, she kissed me on my lips. After I got home, I received a message. Hey, I know that we are still trying to figure out our relationship. I'm sorry it had to end here. Those last few kisses I gave you were goodbye kisses. I hope you understand. Ever since then, I've been single. I could never find a woman who made me feel the same way, except my mom, of course. It might not have been a slight touch, but it was still a touch. Story 69. The first time I touched the woman I eventually married, it was just her hand and a totally accidental graze. It felt like a jolt of electricity went through my body. I knew right away I was going to marry her. Story 70. The first time we touched, my heart didn't skip a beat. It missed a whole lot of beats. It had been going on for a while, and we could feel the tension and attraction between us. I had only read the word electricity in books, but I felt it with my girlfriend. We would linger and try to lean into each other, but we were too shy to actually touch. It happened in the library. We were sitting together and our thighs touched. Felt so good and overwhelming. I looked at her and she reflected the same feelings I had. Once we touched, we kind of went wild. We started rubbing thighs and holding hands, and it was magical. I yearn for her touch every day. I wish she was here with me. Long distance is hard. Story 71. I sat next to him for the entire movie, wanting to hold his hand. I told him later, and he said he wanted to hold my hand too, wondering why he didn't. On the next date, we kissed, and it was amazing. Story 72. We went to the rodeo on our first date. He put his hand on my thigh, near my knee, during the show after we had dinner, and I was instantly attracted. Story 73. It was an extremely dark time for him, and I was his last hope. I, a 21-year-old female, had been talking to him, a 21-year-old male, about some deep issues, and he finally opened up to me. He showed me how little he was loved at home, how he raised all 5 of his younger siblings alone, how he pays for everything himself, and how he felt trapped with no hope of escaping. He was ready to give up on life, so I took him to the woods. We hiked, stopped at a pond, and looked for salamanders. I then took him to my house and let him stay there for 3 days. That first night, I hugged him and promised I would be there for him. I told him I love him and that he deserves to enjoy his life. No matter what, I wouldn't give up on him. He sobbed for 5 hours in my arms until he passed out, having shared all the trauma he had endured, all the siblings he lost, and all the pain weighing on his soul. It's been a year since then, and I have not let him feel unloved or unwanted since. We're stronger than ever, laughing every day, holding each other, and falling asleep together. We have never had a fight. I have no intention of hurting my sweet boy, and we talk through any worries or issues like adults. No anger, no hatred, just open ears and hearts. I dislike our job, but it's the best thing that has happened to us. Story 74. I met my husband at a cosplay convention. The first subtle brush was our arms, and honestly, it felt like electric sparks went through me. As cliché as it sounds, I was too nervous to make a move and had no clue how to flirt or even how to convey my feelings to him. Fortunately, during the rave night of the 3-day convention, he made the first move. We danced and laughed until we were exhausted. We sat down to rest shoulder to shoulder and chatted. When I turned to look at him, he eventually reached out and kissed me. I had chills and I just knew he was the one. We've been together almost 10 years now, and I still get chills when we kiss. He also told me his favorite picture is when he was trying to sneak a photo of me in my cosplay after borrowing his collar. I happened to look over and just stuck my tongue out at him like a goof. Story 75. I leaned over during a concert to talk to her and placed my hand on her knee. She was wearing jeans with a hole in them. I felt a surge of electricity. I have never felt anything like it before or since. We have been together for 5 years and married for 1. We still look back at that moment as the instant that changed our lives. Story 76. This is one of my favorite memories to share. The first time we had the slightest body touch was when she discovered how ticklish I am. She innocently brushed up against my lower back, and I fell to my knee, making a guttural noise as if someone had pressed my power button. Story 77. Plane ride home from a tropical vacation with friends. I had a crush on a girl. We sat together in economy class, tired from the trip, and brushed against each other's elbows while trying to get some rest. I felt a spark, ignored it, and played it cool. We went our separate ways when the plane landed. A few months later, we entered into a relationship, and I asked her about that particular plane ride. It turns out she felt the same connection and was already falling for me then. We have been married for 10 years. Story 78. It wasn't great. She basically attacked me when she got in the car. She came on very strong right away, but I love her, so I guess it wasn't so terrible. It was just really off-putting. I've never had that happen before. Story 79. Honestly, I can't recall the first time my wife, then girlfriend, first touched me. It was a long time ago. We had been friends for a few years while we dated other people, so there may have been some incidental contact at some point. When we both decided we liked each other, we were living in different states and going to different schools. I convinced her and a mutual friend to come visit me. At the airport, I believe I gave her a hug. Later that night, when we deviated from the plan of me taking one of her couches and her taking the bed, I will always remember that. Story 80. My friend was braiding my crush's hair and needed something to hold it in place. She asked me to hold my crush's hair. I inquired if that was okay, and she confirmed that it was fine. She made it clear that this was the only time I would get to touch her. It was the most amazing feeling ever, an absolute sense of bliss. Nothing has come close to matching that moment even years later. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.